And I invite you to join me in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchens. We now have 5 minutes of rebuttal from Dr. Turek.
In fairness to Christopher, that statement obviously was his opening statement, was not meant to rebut my statement, but now my statement is to rebut his. And I want to point out that most of what Christopher just said there is pretty much complaints about religion and religious people and has no impact on whether or not God exists. Religious people can be the worst people that ever lived. That says nothing about whether or not God exists. People can do evil. That doesn't mean the parents don't exist. Children can do evil. Doesn't mean the parents don't exist. My kids do evil, but I'm still here. I do evil. My dad's still here. In fact, he's sitting right there. What does that prove about whether or not God exists? Let me try and go down some of the things Christopher said. Yes, I am an atheist when it comes to Zeus. But Zeus is not spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator that I hopefully, at least I thought I gave evidence for. And maybe Christopher will come back to my statements on that later. I don't believe in Zeus because I don't think there's any evidence for Zeus, but I think there's evidence for the theistic God. Deism, I didn't make the direct shift to theism. I probably should have been more explicit. I think it's obvious there's a theistic God because life came several billion years after the creation. That is not a deistic concept. That is a theistic concept. I didn't say anything about Christianity. Even though I am a Christian, I don't have time to defend Christianity here. I'd love to debate Christopher on the issue of Christianity in the future, and I'll publicly offer that right now. If he wants to debate whether or not the New Testament documents are reliable and tell us really what happened about what Jesus came and said and did, I'd be happy to do it. But when I mentioned before, I have a couple arguments on the bench. I've got almost a full baseball team of arguments here. I've got a couple arguments on the bench. It's the resurrection is one of them, and I don't have time to get to that here. So I'm not backing up the Christian God here. I'm backing up a theistic God, even though personally I do believe in a Christian God. He claimed Darwin was the great emancipator, and that he went on to talk about atrocities, and I think he again missed my point. As I said before, I'm not saying atheists can't be moral. Christopher, what he says in his book again, much of it is true. Religious people have done awful things. In fact, Christianity predicts we'll be hypocrites. That's what the church is. It's full of hypocrites. Whenever somebody says, I don't want to go to church, there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. That's what the church is. We're all fallen. We're all sinners. That's why we need a Savior, because we can't do it. And Christopher said, well, how can you command somebody to be well when they have no capacity to be well? Well, we were well in the beginning, and I'm going into Christian theology here, I understand. I'll just try and answer the point. We were well in the beginning, but then we messed up, and so God, the great physician, came back to save us. That's Christian theology. As again, I don't have time to support it. I'm just pointing out that is the theology. Now, Christopher talked about atrocities, but again, on the atheistic worldview, here's the main point. How do you define what an atrocity is? Who defines it? Who has the authority to define what an atrocity is? The carbon atom? The benzene molecule? I'm not saying you have to believe in God to be moral. I'm not saying that only religious people are moral. I'm not saying atheists can't be moral. I'm not saying atheists don't know morality. I'm saying there's no way to justify what is right and what is wrong unless there's some authority that provides it. What is the authority? In a materialistic worldview, there is no authority. The carbon atom has no moral authority over you. And it seems that Christopher goes on and on about how he does not want to be under some kind of divine totalitarianism. That is a moral rejection of God. Where does he come up with this immoral totalitarianism? His worldview does not afford immorality because his worldview does not afford morality. He has to borrow from the Christian worldview in order to argue against it. In fact, he has to sit in God's lap to slap his face. Where does he get morality from? Where does he get reason from? Where does he get mathematics from? Where does he get consciousness from? Where does the universe... He said there are explanations for where the universe came from. Atheistic, I'd love to hear them. I haven't heard one yet. How does something come from nothing with extreme fine-tuning? What is the explanation for that? He said there are arguments for the beginning of life that are naturalistic, not according to the people who are studying the matter. How about Francis Crick? If I can find his quote here. Francis Crick said, "Every time I write a paper on the origin of life, I swear I'll never write another one because there's too much speculation running after too few facts." Mark Kirshner of Harvard and John C. Gerhardt of Berkeley said, "Everything about evolution before the bacteria-like life forms is sheer conjecture." Biochemist Klaus Doss admits that after more than 30 years of research into the origin of life has led to, quote, "a better perception of the immensity of the problem of the origin of life on Earth rather than its solution. At present, all discussions on the principal theories and experiments in the field either end in stalemate or in a confession of ignorance." Now, I'm not saying that this is a default position, that it must be God. I'm not saying that I just lack a natural explanation for the origin of life. I'm saying that specified complexity, information, the DNA structure that we all have is evidence for an intelligent being. Because information only comes from minds. The laws of ink and paper did not create, God is not great. There was a mind behind it that brought it into existence. And there's a mind behind DNA. What is the atheistic explanation for DNA? What is the atheistic explanation for information? What is the atheistic explanation for all of these 9 things I mentioned? How much time do I have? I have none. Survey said, sit down. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Well, I think I'll just invite Dr. Turek to do the following and make available to us on a sheet of paper, which I'm sure he has, the thesaurus of quotations that he's found from this and that scientist and physicist and natural scientist and so forth. And you will find, when you read them, when you look at them, I was writing them down as you went through them, all of these are statements of uncertainty. All of them. They're statements of all we know is how little we know. That's been for many years my definition of an educated person. Someone who knows enough to know how ignorant they are. It actually is it's not my own original definition, it comes from the Greek, but it's the only definition that works. And no one working, toiling in the field of science could possibly say anything less or more of themselves, especially at a time like this. But there you have it right away. The theistic and the deistic explanation has to be based on a certainty that there is a supervising and, if you want to be a theist, a caring and intervening creator who manages these matters. And there hasn't been a single sentence so far from Dr. Turek in support of that proposition. Let me give you an example. The event horizon of Stephen Hawking that I just mentioned, I'll take a cosmological one to begin with. The event horizon is the lip of the black hole. Suppose you could travel towards a black hole and see it, and see the lip of it, and notice it before you went in and over and down. That's what's known as the event horizon to physicists. Hawking had a gravely ill colleague in Cambridge who said if he knew he was definitely going to die, that's the way he'd like to go, be falling into the event horizon lip of the black hole, because in theory you'd be able to see the past and the future and time, except you wouldn't have quite enough time to do so. But there would be a grand way to check out if you were a physicist. Turn away from this, turn away from that. These incredible, majestic, awe-inspiring thoughts say that think about the burning bush instead. Think about the trivial miracles witnessed by sheep-herding peasants in Bronze Age Palestine. And think about the debt that they feel that we should incur for their sins. It was stated by Dr. Turek that the sins of these people, the transgressions of these people, and the debt they owe their Creator bind all of us as sinners. What a shame we're not perfect. What a shame there's nothing we can do about it. What a shame we're created already in prison and have to earn our emancipation. I tell you again, this is servility to the ultimate power. Now, there are people in this audience much better equipped than I to say that there is so far nothing in our natural world, to move away from the cosmological, there is nothing in our natural world, the globe we live on, that cannot be explained by random mutation combined with evolution by natural selection. Nothing works without that assumption. Everything works with it. There are lots of things that remain to be decided, but it's not a theory, or not just one. It does work, it is operational, it doesn't require a prime mover. Occam's razor says we should dispose of unnecessary, needless assumptions. That's what I propose we do in this case. I'll put it another way. How long would you say Homo sapiens has been on the planet? Francis, not Crick, excuse me, the author of the supervisor of the Human Genome Project. Collins. My new best friend and occasional debating enemy thinks, well, not more than 500,000 years. Richard Dawkins thinks it could be as much as 750,000. I can sink the number, actually, if you like. We know that the species left Africa about 75,000 years ago, having probably shrunk down to about 2,000 or 3,000 people as a result of a terrible climatic disturbance, probably from Indonesia, probably from a predecessor of Krakatoa, which meant that we were this close to joining the 99.8% of all species ever living on the surface of this planet who became extinct. Some design, by the way. Profuse creation of millions and millions and millions of life forms, all to be wiped out, with not even anyone left to testify to their previous existence. We nearly joined that lot. Managed to get out of it just in time. Let's call it, I don't want Francis's million or 500,000 or Richard Dawkins' 75,000, whichever way around. Just give me that amount of time. Suppose we've only been around for 75,000 years. Monotheism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, shows up, what, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago the most. Right? So if you give me my most microscopically small assumption of human existence, for at least 70,000 years, heaven watches as the human species is born, dies, usually of its teeth, usually at about 20, usually with its infants having about a 9, 10, 2% chance of living beyond. I don't have to draw you a picture. Watches this with indifference. Thousands and thousands of generations, miserable, illiterate, starving, hungry. To say nothing of the wars they'll fight with each other. To say nothing of the cruelties they will inflict, as well as the ones they will suffer just from existence. And only 3 or 4, perhaps 5,000 years ago, heaven decides this is enough of that. It's time for an intervention. And the best way to do it would be in the most primitive part of the Middle East. Not in China, where people can read and have looked at telescopes. No, in the most primitive part of the Middle East, basically by offering human sacrifice to them. This is a doctrine that cannot be believed by anyone who's studied anything scientific, anything historical, anything archaeological, anything paleological, anything biological. Can't be believed by anyone. Can't be only believed by someone who wants to be a plaything and a slave of a pitiless totalitarian power. How glad we should be that the evidence for this ghastly entity is nil. Good. Thanks.
I'm going to stay out of the way and let them ask questions of each other. And the way that we've scheduled is 1 minute to ask and 5 to answer. And we'll try to stay to that. So
that's very generous.
If you, Dr. Turek, would like to go first, since you had already posed some questions to Mr. Hitchens.
How many times do we do that?
3 times. So you get 3 apiece.
Could I just propose, unless you really have 3 that you're dying to, I don't have 3 I'm trying to duck. But that seems a long time for the audience to have to wait, it seems to me. Could we do it 2, maybe, and get to their questions?
I have 6.
I'm your witness, then.
So 3 was right. Dr. Turek.
Okay.
Christopher, what is your explanation for the beginning of time, space, and matter out of nothing?
Well, we don't know. I remember being asked by one of my children once, when I said, well, what was there at the Big Bang? And I said, well, you have to imagine, this shows how poverty-stricken our own vocabulary is, and I suspect how poverty-stricken our own capacity is. In other words, I think there are some things, not that we don't understand or know, but that we cannot. So we're reduced to sort of primitive images. But I said, suppose you could picture all of matter, the whole of matter, condensed into, I got this from Hawking, I think, one of his colleagues, condensed into something like a very small, dense black suitcase of the kind you see people carrying money in crime thrillers. And it's about to fly open. That's what you'd have to be able, and everything that's ever going to be is inside that. That was the best I could do. And I don't think many people could do, if I say it myself, that much better. But I was completely unhorsed because the kid said, well, what was outside the suitcase? And I thought, oh, well, I can't do that. And I don't know anyone who can. And that, in a way, would be my whole point. I don't have to know. You do. You're the one who says you know, not me. The theist and the deist say, oh, come on, we know. This is only possible with an author. It's only possible with a creator. It's only possible with a master and commander. It's only possible with a dictator. You're welcome. I don't need 5 minutes.
Is it fair to say, though, that if the creation was out of nothing, and that's the common view today, that the being that brought it into existence, the cause, whatever it was.
Don't say being. What ground do you have to say being?
Because to go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence, you need to make a choice.
No, you don't.
You don't. How does something that...
Where are you getting this choice from?
The choice, how does first of all, there was no nature, there was nothing. So if there was nothing, how do you get something from nothing without a cause?
How do you get, I can answer the same question in the way I did before. How do you get so much nothing from something? You look into the night sky. If you're in, say, the Carmel Peninsula, you can't do it from many parts of Virginia now, but if you are in certain parts of California, as I was recently, you can look into the night sky and see universes blowing up and bursting into flame every night of the week, several times. They had something, and it's all or nothing now. Who's the author of that? Who mandated that? Who's the creator of that? Who's the dictator who demands that sacrifice? You're making a rod for your own back here.
No, the fact that things go out of existence, Christopher, doesn't mean that they're not designed. The typewriter is out of existence right now, thankfully. But the typewriter's designed. So the fact that the universe is going to heat death doesn't mean that it didn't have a designer at the beginning. And of course, religious people believe that somebody's going to intervene to stop it before it does go. And even if
they do?
Even if it doesn't,
wait.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Even if nobody intervenes, if it goes to heat death, it goes to heat death.
Excuse me. Did the religious among you, ladies and gentlemen, understand, I did not, that there will be an intervention to make an exception in our case? That this will not happen to our cosmos? That God will prevent the heat death?
That's the Christian view, and as I said...
I had no idea.
Yes. That a new heaven and new earth will be created. Genesis is paradise lost. Revelation is paradise restored.
It sounds fatuous to me, I've got to say.
Again, how do you get something from nothing?
I am not the one who has to answer the question. Excuse me, you're the one who has to answer. You're the one who claims to know. You say there was a creation moment and a creator. I want to know why you're changing the subject and saying to me, how do I not know this? When you're the one who has all the information. I also want to know this. I want to know what sources you have that are not available to me. How do you know that an intervention will occur to prevent the entropy and implosion and destruction of our solar system?
If you want to go to our second debate, I'll provide that. Well, but what I'm saying is, let's say there's no intervention. Let's say there's no intervention. We go to heat death. Does that mean that the universe was not created and not designed?
It doesn't entail that belief, no, but it makes it.
Okay, so what's your point?
It makes it seem a very capricious designer. Shall we say, rather, as I said, it's an old verse of Phil Greville's, created sick, commanded to be well. Why would people be told, okay, I can create you, but I'm going to create you with original sin, misery, shame, death of children, disease, and so on, just to see if you can pass a test that would mean I might not send you to hell. I don't say that that didn't happen. I say that I'm very glad that the evidence for it is very scanty. And I accuse those who do believe it, and I can't have been surely misunderstood on this point, of harboring a very sinister desire to live in a totalitarian system.
How do you define sinister?
Mr. Hitchens.
The desire to be a slave.
Is that
masochism?
Is
I
that,
think. I regard
chemicals in your brain,
I regard
or is there
masochism.
something beyond you that?
I'll say that I think masochism is a sinister and creepy impulse. Yes.
Mr. Hitchens. Question for Dr. Turek.
All right. I won't take a minute to ask. I don't just support and try and help out those who dissent from the ridiculous belief of Christianity, the horrible idea of vicarious redemption. In other words, the idea that by watching another person suffer, an innocent person suffer, that you could be freed not just from your debts or your sins, but your responsibilities. You could cast your sins on a scapegoat. I don't just oppose that disgusting belief, but I oppose the Judaism from which it's plagiarized and the Islam that plagiarizes from it. And I give publicity and exposure whenever I can to those who were brave enough in old times to oppose this nightmarish belief. And one of the great opponents of the Islamic totalitarianism in ancient Persia was the great Omar Khayyam, perhaps the greatest poet of old Persia, whose Rubaiyat, I'm sure, is known at least to some of you. And my favorite verse of this comes from the Robert Le Gallienne translation, and it takes the form of a question. The quatrain is in the form of a question. It says, "And do you think that unto such as you, a maggot-minded, starved, fanatic crew, God gave a secret and denied it me? Well, what matters it? Believe that too." To this magnificent astronomer and scientist and physician and humanist of Persia, who opposed the cruel, sadistic, verminous, ignorant mullahs of his day, I borrow the question, what is your authority for saying that you know something that I don't?
Christopher, I'm giving a probability argument. As you said before, you can't disprove the existence of God, and you can't prove beyond any doubt that there's a God. I'm giving probability. I'm giving cosmological, teleological, moral, consciousness, reason, mathematics, all of those things I listed before. It's open. The evidence is open to everybody. And this is related to your 70,000 years point that you just made there. From a Christian perspective, God has always had a revelation, even before Christ. It talks about the fact that God has always had a witness. There's three witnesses. There's creation. Everyone has creation. There's conscience. Everyone has conscience. And there's Christ. Now, Christ, true, only came 2,000 years ago. But his sacrifice of atonement, his sacrifice of atonement is retroactive to everybody that lived before him. So he's always had a witness. It is quite convenient, and that is the very nature of God. You're absolutely correct.
Well, I got him to say it. You see, if we were only discussing ontological questions, that would be all very well, and it could be quite amusing. I could say that you require a higher degree of standard of proof for your proposition than I perhaps do for mine, and you'd probably accept that, and so forth, and we could go back and forth. But we'd be paltering again with the essence of the matter, which is this. The difference between the theist and the deist is as follows. The deist says, may not make sense without some kind of designer. The theist says, when I tell you what to do, Christopher, I have God on my side. The deist says, he can tell what God wants of me, what length I should shave off the end of my penis, if I'm a boy or have a male child, or off the clitoris if it's a female child. He knows to the exactitude what the proportions of that should be, what the diet should be, what the dietary laws ought to be, who I should sleep with, and in what position. and various other things. And since God doesn't ever directly appear and say, do it this way, it's done for him, this is really convenient, by human representatives who claim to act in his name. So that's why I think your standard of proof should be a great deal higher, because if the reason this point is important to you is because it would mean real power in the only world that actually exists, which is the material world, of you over me. And you wonder why I'm not keen.
Okay, the material world is all that exists. That thought that you just mentioned, Christopher, the material world, that all that exists, is that thought material? And if it is, why is it true?
That sounds like casuistry to me, but I mean, I certainly think that that everything that I am capable of thinking, saying, feeling, and so forth does depend on my continued existence as a, what shall we say, mass of molecules, or shoot me in the head, and I can't go on like this. And I won't be coming back to bother you either.
Question? Sure.
Nor am I going anywhere after that's happened.
Christopher.
And I don't wish it otherwise, by the way. I don't wish it otherwise.
God gives you what you desire.
So, would that were the case?
I have bear with me, a relatively long question here. After admitting that an unborn child is a human being, you write on page 221, and thankfully you say in the book that it's nonsense that an unborn child is not a human being. You admit that the unborn child is. You say this, and I quote, "There may be circumstances in which it is not desirable to carry a fetus to full term. You then go on to advocate termination of pregnancy if birth control fails." Here's my question. Why is it that, according to you, when God plays God by taking a life prematurely, in the Old Testament, for example, it is a moral outrage, but when you play God by taking a life prematurely through abortion, it is a moral right?
Well, it's a false distinction. I mean, that's not what I say. I mean, I say that the great abortifacient is, I would say, nature. I don't say God. Of course, God does not decide that so many pregnancies are not carried to full term. Nature knows, in the case of our species, as with every other mammal and primate, that some fetuses are not going to make it and flushes them out. That's just a brute fact. We wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case, because we're, as you know, adapted biologically to an environment we've abandoned, the savannah. That's why we have appendices that are designed for grass eaters, and you know all of this. It's all very well knowable. You can't be having a brood of sickly, half-baked children and get away from the predators. I mean, so nature is the great abortifacient. I certainly don't blame God for it. I do, as a humanist, believe that the concept unborn child is a real one, and I think the concept is underlined by all the recent findings of embryology, and about the early viability of a well-conceived human baby, the one that isn't going to be critically deformed, or even some that are, will be able to survive outside the womb earlier and earlier and earlier. And I see that date only being pushed back, and I feel a responsibility to consider the occupant of the womb as a candidate member of society in the future, and thus to say that it cannot be only the responsibility of the woman to decide upon it, that it's a social question and an ethical and a moral one. And I say this as someone who has no supernatural belief. So your question ought to have been this: how do I have any ethical opinions, since I don't believe that I'm created? And I don't believe I'm going to heaven.
I prefer the first question, if you don't mind.
Right, but okay. But I mean, it just isn't it entailed by it? I appeal to the audience. Have I not answered the question about the termination of pregnancy? Which bit have I not answered? You better prompt me then.
I'll read it again. Why is it that, according to you, when God plays God by taking a life prematurely?
Well, it isn't according to me. I don't say God does that.
Nature
does
in your
it.
book, which is right over here, you have an entire chapter about the atrocities in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And the atrocities have to do with God commanding genocide and those things. And you obviously have a problem with that, as many people should. So my question again is, why, according to you, when God plays God by taking a life prematurely in the Old Testament, is it a moral outrage, but when you play God by taking a life prematurely through an abortion, it is a moral right?
Well, once again, I'm sorry if my work is so obscure, But I don't say that I have a moral right to terminate a pregnancy. I've given all the reasons that I think hedge that question ethically and morally very sternly, very stringently. And in any case, it's not like saying that every living child of the Amalekites should be destroyed. And an injunction by God to Moses to say he's been too merciful, he's spared too many children and enslaved too few women, and didn't make the genocide complete. I'm sorry, I've never been accused of, and I expect not to be, if I'm lucky enough in my life, of any such thing. And the idea that there's a moral equivalence between the two, or handling the really difficult question of an unviable fetus and what should be done about it, isn't a moral equivalence at all.
So do you want to say that all unborn life is, like you say in the book, is a human being, and therefore you should not kill it? Is that what you want to say to get out of this dilemma, or what do you want to say?
No, but I think the presumption that I've long said that the presumption is that the unborn entity has a right on its side, and that every effort should be made to see if it can be preserved. And I think that's an ethical imperative. What I do say in the book is I think the Roman Catholic Church makes this argument immoral when it could be a moral one by saying that contraception is not to be allowed, by saying that contraception is the moral equivalent of abortion. In other words, to say that contraception is also murder, which is a nonsensical and disproportionate position. I quote some serious Catholics in my book. William F. Buckley, the late, is one. Clare Boothe Luce is another, by saying, if the Church says that contraception and abortion are morally the same, it degrades the opposition to abortion morally. And by making absurd arguments, as it has in the past, Aquinas believed that every single sperm contained a microembryo inside it, and thus that, if you like, I hope I don't offend anyone, hand jobs are genocide. As for blowjobs, don't start. That an ectopic pregnancy, in other words, a direct threat to the life of the mother, a fallopian tube pregnancy, is, instead of a direct threat to the life of the mother and an obvious no-starter for a human embryo, because that's going anyway, is someone who should be allowed to vote. This is nonsense. It's casuistry, it's immoral, it's superstition, and it prevents people from thinking seriously about matters that humanism can decide for itself, for heaven's sake, without any supernatural intervention.
Your question, sir.
Oh, well, since I answered your last question with a question of my own, I'll make it my question to you. I'm very keen to know how it is that you, in a sense, that you dare to say that without a belief in religion, I would have no source for ethical or moral
It's not what I'm
beliefs.
saying.
You seem to hint at it.
No.
Did he not?
No, oh, I'm not saying you don't know morality, Christopher. I'm saying you can't justify morality without a being beyond yourself.
So that, just okay, good. So that if I say that for me it's enough to be willing to love my fellow man and perhaps hope that my fellow man and woman will give me some of the same consideration in return, and that after all, the Samaritan, of whom we've all heard, was the only one to help after the priests and the Levites had passed by. And the Samaritan also, though he's talked of by Jesus, can't have been a Christian because he appears in a story told by Jesus, so there can't be any Christianity before that. Somehow, he knew the moral thing to do is to help his fellow person without a religious instruction.
Yes, that's
that's actually the whole point of the parable, though it's not the way it's usually told.
And that's what Christianity teaches. You know morality. It's written on your heart. You don't need the scripture to know right from wrong.
And this was only available to us 2,000 years ago.
No, you've known it from the beginning of time. Conscience has been on humanity from forever.
You'll have to
That's
let
the
me
point.
press you a little bit on that. I mean, William Ewart Gladstone spent a huge amount of his life, and he was a great scholar of Latin and Greek, showing that every one of the Greek Socratic and other moral precepts, all they were just prefigurations of Christianity. These are the best the Greeks could do. before Jesus arrived. But,
No.
Because he
I don't agree with
couldn't
that.
face the idea that these solidarities and moralities and understandings are innate in people and don't require divine permission. I just have to ask you, if you could do it plainly, which side do you come down on? Do you think we need divine permission to act humanly to each other?
No, it has nothing to do with permission. It has to do with the ontological category known as morality. Where does morality come from? Does it come from the benzene molecule, the carbon molecule, the oxygen molecule? In your worldview, where does it come from?
Suppose that we were having this discussion before the existence of molecules was understood.
It's irrelevant.
No, it's not, because the discussion about where does the good come from was being conducted before Lucretius developed the atomic theory, before Democritus and Epicurus, I should better say, understood that the whole world was made up of atoms and molecules. Before that was known, people were arguing, why do we behave one way to our fellows, and we call it good, and another way, and we call it wicked?
Because it's written
The
on...
molecular, that you can't, I don't think you can build in a molecular distraction to this.
I don't have the molecular problem, you do. So you're a materialist. I'm trying to ask you, where does morality come from in a materialistic worldview?
Well, did I not just acquit myself of that charge and say that the argument precedes the knowledge of the atomic and molecular structure?
No,
of
it
the
doesn't.
universe?
No.
Not that I think, by the way, that the atomic and molecular structure is irrelevant, and it could be that we might find out that there are, who knows, pheromones or other phenomena that do have an influence on our moral conditioning. This still wouldn't, to a morally normal person, relieve them of the responsibility of saying that I feel I know what's right. I feel that some things my children don't need to be told. They already know.
Let me interject here and just ask a question another way.
Whereas to tell a child, you go to this church, which means you'll go to heaven, but your little playmates don't go to that church, and therefore will go to hell, seems to me to be an unpleasant thing to be saying. But
yes, that is.
Maybe I'm in a minority then.
That could be an unpleasant thing, but how do you develop...
Actually, an evil thing to say.
Let's call it evil, Christopher.
And something that only a religious person would dream of saying.
Let's call it evil. Where does evil come from?
Religion. And to answer your next question, morality comes from humanism and is stolen by religion for its own purposes.
Humanism according to who? Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, who?
You're saying that Hitler was a humanist?
Just Hitchens.
I've lived to hear it said.
Hitchens.
In Virginia. Hitler was a Catholic. Hitler was a Catholic, so was Mussolini.
Give me a... How does morality exist if it's just my opinion against your opinion and there's no
official political concordat with the
beyond?
Protestant and Catholic churches? Both of them wanted the worship of themselves as well as of God.
So I suppose no evil comes from atheism.
And their third main ally, Hirohito, the Emperor of Japan, not content just to be theocratic, was himself a god. So anyone who says that fascism and Nazism was secular is an ignoramus.
Why is it wrong?
On a gigantic scale.
All right, okay. I'm asking an ontological question.
I'm not going to be called a Hitlerite because I'm a humanist. Okay?
I'm not asking a sociological question. All right. Let me ask a question another way. This is my last question. If God does not exist, why do all people have a fixed moral obligation to love and not murder? How do molecules in motion have any authority to tell you how to behave? When you do something wrong, whose standard are you breaking? Who are you displeasing? The carbon atom, the benzene molecule, who?
This question has been asked, Socrates answered it like this, when he was on trial for his life. Accused of blasphemy, by the way. He said that he had an inner daemon, was the way he put it. Not demon, a daemon, a spirit, an inner critic, a conscience would be one way of putting it. And that he knew enough to know, even when he was making the best speech of his life, that if he was making a point that was somehow dishonest or incomplete or shady, the daemon would tell him, yeah, that was clever, but you shouldn't have tried it. He knew. Okay? Any person of average moral equipment has the same knowledge. I hope you'll. If you don't, I'm very sorry for you. Adam Smith called it the internal witness, who we all have to have a conversation with all the time. It's been C.S. Lewis decided to call it conscience and to attribute it to the divine, but he didn't improve on what Adam Smith said in Theory of Moral Sentiments or what Socrates said when standing trial for his own life. It's been sometimes colloquially defined as, why do people behave well when nobody's looking? I don't believe there's anyone in this hall who doesn't know what I mean by that. Why, when it won't do you any good, will you decide, I could have kept that wallet I found on the back of the cab seat, but I'm not going to. I'm going to turn it in. I'm going to find its real possessor. There are people to whom those thoughts do not occur, who are deaf to that idea, who only think of themselves, who wouldn't worry about the internal daemon or censor or companion. And there are, of course, people who only get pleasure from being unpleasant to other people and inflicting cruelty on them. The first group we call the sociopathic, and the second group we call the psychopathic. And they occur in nature and in society. My only problem is with those who think that they're all made in the image of God. The one explanation that absolutely doesn't work at all, that gets you nowhere, that explains nothing.
Christopher, it's your turn to ask.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir.
Well, my question is this. Would anyone in the audience like to join this conversation?
We actually have questions if you're ready to move along.
Yeah, I am.
There are a couple of questions, several similar questions that boil down to a couple of questions for each of you, and then one that I'll end with that I think is an important one to address to both of you. Since you gave your turn away, Mr. Hitchens, I'll ask you first. If the questioner asks, if God does not exist, what then is the purpose of life?
Well, I can only answer for myself. What cheers me up? I suppose mainly gloating over the misfortunes of other people. I guess that.
And you say evil comes from religion, huh?
I guess that has to be it. I think, yeah, mainly crowing over the miseries of others. It doesn't always work, but it never completely fails. And then there's irony. There's irony, and which is the gin in the Campari, the cream in the coffee. Sex can have diminishing returns, but it's amazing. No, that's pretty much it, and then it's a clear run to the grave.
Dr. Turek.
Yes, sir. Do you want me to answer that or not? That's for somebody else, okay.
If Christianity is true, then why aren't the differences that Jesus makes in the lives of Christians more powerful or evident than the impact other religions make on their adherents?
I don't know if I accept the premise of the question.
Well, the questioner adds, Gandhi was every bit as influential as any Christian.
Yeah, that's true, and that's one of the problems with Christianity. The biggest problem with Christianity is Christians. I admit it.
But the questioner is asking a more central question, which is, if this is the truth,
yes,
why then doesn't that truth, by the weight of its infinite being, cause its adherents to behave in a way that we can all notice?
Well, I think you can notice it in several Christians. I think Christians for years have been the ones that have built hospitals and cared for the poor and cared for the weak and the sick. So I think it does make a difference. My problem, which is part of the problem that the questioner is asking, is why doesn't it have this effect on everyone? And I'll throw a little Christian theology in here. The problem isn't that we don't have all the Holy Spirit. We do. We just don't allow all the Holy Spirit to do what it should do. It's our problem. We are fallen human beings. And that's why Christ had to come, because we are fallen human beings.
And has to come again, because he didn't get it right the first time. I agree with you that the grammar of the question is wrong, but for a different reason. I don't see what's moral about Christian preaching. For example, apart from the horrible idea of vicarious redemption, I'll say again, in case I missed you the first time, what I mean by that. I could pay your debt, even if I didn't know you. If I was a friend, I could say, you're in debt, I'll pay it. In extreme cases, people have been known to say, I'll serve your sentence in prison. I could do that for you. What I cannot do is relieve you of your responsibility. I can't say, throw your sins on me, they'll melt away. Immoral. People are not allowed to be, they're not entitled to be relieved of their responsibilities. And the vicarious redemption by human sacrifice is a very primitive and horrible scapegoating idea that belongs to the barbaric period of human history.
So all pardons are immoral?
No, not all pardons. No, I didn't say that. I said vicarious redemption is an immoral doctrine. It's also immoral of the Nazarene to say, take no thought for the morrow, not to clothe, not to eat, not to invest, leave your family, leave your children, leave everything, give up the world, no investment, no thrift, no thought for the future, just follow me. That's only moral if you are a sure believer in the idea that the world is about to come to an end, which was the case with this apocalyptic.
I guess you never read the parable of the talents.
He said the prophecy is that the world is coming to an end real soon. There's no point in caring about anything else. That's not immoral preaching to me at all. There are many other ways in which I fail to see how any bad behavior can ever be described as un-Christian. And of course, it's completely laughable to say Christians build hospitals. As many Christians have bombed hospitals as have built them, and as many Muslims have built hospitals as Christians have. And as many Babylonians have built great buildings as Christians have. If that's the best you can do, that's the best you can do.
One of the questioners repeats a point from Dr. Turek's opening statement that apparently he or she feels you did not address, Mr. Hitchens, about the irreducible complexity of DNA. And is it possible for such structures to have formed by chance?
Well, I have two responses to that. One is, what would she have said before she knew about DNA?
What does that have to do with anything? They existed prior to anyone knowing about them.
Yes. Right.
Gravity existed before we knew about it,
That's
Christopher.
correct.
You need an explanation for that.
That's correct. And Christianity thought it could explain everything, and then it found there were more things. Wait, it's very simple, same as your point about molecules that I said that these arguments predate Epicurus, Lucretius, and the atomic theory. Christianity used to say it can explain everything. All you need to know is there's an all-powerful, all-loving, all-intervening, all-knowing, omniscient God. Okay, well then wait, wouldn't DNA explain more? Well that only shows that God's even cleverer than we thought. So it's an infinitely expanding tautology. There are some Christians who accept, in fact it was actually a Catholic physicist at the University of Louvain in Belgium who first came up with the idea of what we now call the Big Bang. And most popes, not all, most popes have accepted it. Some have thought of it as a challenge to Christianity. The Pope Leo, who he went to, I can't remember the scientist's name for a second, maybe someone here can help me. He went to the Pope and said, look, looks like this is how things started. And the Pope said, if you like, I'll make it a dogma that every Catholic has to believe it. He said, that would be slightly missing the point, Your Holiness.
Christopher, what does this have to do with the origin of DNA?
Well, because it is true to say that religion, as Stephen Jay Gould said, that religion and science belong to non-overlapping magisteria. I think these magisteria are in many ways incompatible and in many ways irreconcilable, but it is no more true to say that the existence of the complexity of DNA shows that God was more ingenious than we thought, than it is to say that it necessarily shows by its self-revealing ingenuity that we don't need the hypothesis of God. Both of these positions would be, in my opinion, somewhat reductionist, though I would have to say that I think the second one is more persuasive and more elegant.
Gould is wrong.
Will that do?
Christians or religious people, religion is trying to find out how the universe began, and so is science. They're not.
No, religion says it does know, excuse me.
No, it's trying to find
Religion is not a process of scientific inquiry. Religion is an affirmation of faith. It says it already knows.
I am a religious person, Christopher, and I'm using evidence to try and point out that the universe exploded into being out of nothing.
And you have scientific evidence for the view that an intervention will occur to prevent the implosion and
No, forget that. Let's start at the beginning.
I can't forget it.
Let's start at the beginning. That's for debate 2.
It's the only thing you've said all evening that I'm going to remember.
Gentlemen.
That's for debate 2.
No. I mean, don't say, look, do yourself and your faith the honor of saying it's faith. Don't say it's science-based.
The argument would be...
You won't get away with it.
Look, the argument would be, Christopher, is that if the universe exploded into being out of nothing, then miracles are possible because the greatest miracle of all has already occurred. The question is, have miracles occurred in the first
No, because
century?
a miracle-
That requires another debate
A
whereby
miracle
we
is
have to look at the historical evidence and see. And if it is true that that Jesus really did come and say and do the things that the New Testament writer said he did, then whatever he teaches is true, because if he rose from the dead, he was God. If he taught that there will be an intervention, then there will be. That's the argument. I don't have time to support it.
Very good. Now, Josh, a sentence or two from David Hume on miracles would clear all this up.
You'll need this.
Oh dear. What have I done?
It's fallen off, sorry.
That's one up. If I... A sentence or two from David Hume would correct what you said. A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural
No,
order.
an intervention,
You can't
not a
say
suspension.
of the Big Bang, which is the foundation of the natural order, that it's a suspension of what it starts. You may not do that. However, if you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake? And in each case you must, and especially if you didn't see it yourself and you're hearing it from someone who says that they did. I would go further and say the following. I'll grant you that it would be possible to track the pregnancy of the woman Mary, who's mentioned about 3 times in the Bible, and to show that there was no male intervention in her life at all, but yet she delivered herself of a healthy baby boy. I can say, I don't say that's impossible. Parthenogenesis is not completely unthinkable, but it does not prove that his paternity is divine. And it wouldn't prove that any of his moral teachings were thereby correct. Nor, if I was to see him executed one day and see him walking the streets the next, would that show that his father was God, or his mother was a virgin, or that his teachings were true, especially given the commonplace nature of resurrection at that time and place. After all, Lazarus was raised, never said a word about it. The daughter of Jairus was raised, didn't say a thing about what she'd been through. And the Gospels tell us that at the time of the crucifixion, all the graves in Jerusalem opened, and their occupants wandered around the streets to greet. So that it seems the resurrection was something of a banality at the time. Not all of those people clearly were divinely conceived. So I'll give you all the miracles, and you'll still be left exactly where you are now, holding an empty sack.
No, Christopher, you have to look at each miracle in light of the evidence and the context. Hume was wrong because his premise that was wrong was the one that said the evidence for the regular is always greater than that for the rare. It's not. From Hume's own worldview, if Hume was here today, he wouldn't even believe in the Big Bang because it only happened once. It's not a regular event, it happened once. He wouldn't believe in the spontaneous generation of life, which is what a materialist must believe because it only happened once. He wouldn't believe in his own birth because it only happened once. In fact, he wouldn't be able to believe in the whole history of our solar system because it only happened once. You don't need regular events to know whether or not something happened. Singular events happen all the time. This debate will never happen again, yet you're here to witness it.
I'm just going to repose my trust in the audience here. There's an obvious difference between a singularity and a miracle. And I think it would be embarrassing to try and explain it. It would be patronizing to try and explain it.
Dr. Turek, a member of the audience takes issue with your claim that objective morality necessarily relies in an absolute deity, asking instead, what about empathy, for which there are significant apparent biological bases?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
What about empathy, for which there are fairly well-established biological bases? A very human emotion. Cannot empathy lead to morality?
Is it right to be empathetic? That's the question. I'm not saying there's no chemical connection between morality and, or for morality, I should say. There certainly, when we think, there are chemicals going on. The question is, what is the standard that makes empathy or love right? What is the chemical composition of love? How much does justice weigh?
Well,
These are all things that make no sense in a materialistic worldview.
Well, but that's not entirely true. Let's say, for example, that cognitive neuroscientists are able to determine with scientific levels of precision that, in fact, certain neurochemical and cognitive events essentially always co-occur with the experience of empathy.
But that wouldn't mean that empathy's right. See, there may be chemical compositions that cause that guy to chop that guy's head off on the Canadian bus. That wouldn't make it right. The question is, what makes something right? In a materialistic worldview, there's nothing that can make something right or wrong. As David Hume has said, you cannot get an ought from an is.
Well, I'm happy to agree with that. I mean, I think that's true. But I have to add only that some of us have been lucky enough to see it or meet people who've done it, and all of us have read about it. There are people who will, when a grenade is lobbed through the window, throw themselves on it before it can blow up. It does happen. There are people who die under torture without giving away the whereabouts of their comrades. There are people who go do bomb disposal work and sit defusing huge device. They know any minute. It does happen. It's always happened. It's common to every known human society. It's a part of every heroic narrative of every known society there's ever been. Those who do it are honored. They are sung, as we say, in the times when there was no literal record. And it doesn't require divine sanction or permission. It is, we're proud to say, if not innate in us, we'd be too humble to say that. It's innate in our species. It's something we can all aspire to.
Yes, you
but
know
we
it.
do not get it from Big Brother. If we did, that would degrade it. It would mean it wasn't heroic. It wasn't brave. It wasn't individual. It wasn't exemplary.
Why are these things
good? It didn't deserve anything. Because it would be in the hope either of a reward from Big Brother or for fear of punishment from it. It would abolish morality. It destroys ethics. It means the individual example is dust.
Christopher, you've already abolished morality by your materialistic worldview. There's no such thing as morality if you're just a bunch of chemicals.
Wait a second. It's okay. I already know some people will clap anything. Do you mean to say that the human, the body of a mammal, a primate, is not a chemical composition?
No, it is.
Oh, good.
I'm questioning where
why do you act as if this has only just been discovered and as if it's a theological point?
Because you apparently haven't discovered
that in spite of that,
morality...
no, I would rather say in spite of the fact that I am a primate, or not, notwithstanding, perhaps I'd better say that I am a primate, nonetheless I'm capable of thinking about heroism, self-sacrifice, example, and so forth.
Why are all those things good?
Don't turn to me and say, how can you say that and be a primate? I'm a primate. I can't alter the fact that I'm a primate. I can conceal it better than some people can. That's the best I can do. You're a primate as well, and you'll have to agree with both of us that it shows, okay?
Let's finish with this, which is the fundamental question. And I think deserves a serious answer. The writer says, gentlemen, I'd venture to say that no one is two words, by the way. No one came into this room without already deciding who he or she agrees with. And no one will leave with a different mindset. What would it take for each of you? What evidence would you need? Upon what basis would you make a decision to change your mind fundamentally about the question that we gathered here to discuss this evening?
Great question. Well, Christianity would be refuted by somehow discovering the body of Christ. Theism might be, I don't know how you could refute theism if all the scientific evidence somehow changed, if, I don't know how you deal with the morality issue, if the fine-tuning didn't occur, if we could find If the universe is eternal, it wouldn't need a cause, but all the scientific evidence seems to suggest the universe is eternal, so it needs a cause, and the cause must be immaterial, spaceless, timeless. But if all that changed, that might be at least get me to doubt theism. Sir?
In most of the debates, I wish I'd thought of this evening, actually. Oh, God. Much too laid back. Much too laid back. In most of the debates I've taken part in, I wish I'd thought of doing it this evening, too. We took a vote before the debate, including registering the undecided, and then one at the end, to see, basically to see where the undecided had gone. And I was always surprised by how many people had come, or at least were willing to consider themselves as having come, with an open mind. My view is this: very few people have that much difficulty thinking of themselves as objects of a divine plan. The great advantage religion has is our own solipsism. It's the same as people who don't really believe in astrology, but they'll take a quick peek to see what's happening to Taurus today. And if it says, well, might be a good time for a flutter on the stock exchange, not to think, hang on, the planets don't really move to determine my investments, but maybe, it's not impossible. It could all be about me. I think about it quite a lot, actually, because I have the same birthday as Thomas Jefferson, April the 13th, except that I don't, because he was born under the old calendar. And I think though it says on his tomb he was born on the 13th of April, he was actually born on something like the 25th of April under the old calendar. I've often wondered how the horoscope people managed the transition, the time when everyone had to change which star sign they were. I dare say it got done easily enough. Religion works for most people because to have people, in a sense, horribly do want it to be true, that they are supervised, that God looks out for them, that they might be rewarded or they might be punished. It has this terrible servile advantage. That's why I consider it to be morally superior to be an atheist, to say I would rather live without that ghastly master-slave mentality.
And no evidence or no event that could change your commitment to that belief.
Well, I can only say that if there was, I'm very relieved to find, having studied what I think of as the best evidence in arguments among physicists, biologists, paleontologists, students of mythology, history, archaeology, and so on, very relieved to find there's no evidence for it at all. If I thought it was true, I would consider myself condemned to live under a tyranny. And I've spent my entire life repudiating that idea and helping, I hope, others to think the same. But there is not a chance, of course. There isn't a single chance that anyone will find that, hey, after all, we can definitely know that a virgin conceived or that a condemned felon walked again. And it's quite absurd for anyone to argue in scientific terms as if any of that is even thinkable. What I don't understand, and I suppose I should close by this, is why anybody should be so contemptuous, I suppose is the word, or so insecure about their own faith as not to call it that. Did you hear him say at any point this evening, this is my faith, I believe it in spite of the evidence to the contrary. I lay my life on it. I believe I'm redeemed by it. I think I will live eternally because... No, he has no confidence to say anything like that. Instead, he tries to mix it up in an area, scientific inquiry, where he's no more competent than, hey, even I am. And that was where he made his big mistake. Thanks.
Gentlemen, what did we decide? 5 minutes to close?
5 to 10, 7 maybe?
Since Dr. Turek went first in the opening, would you mind going first now?
Oh, I thought I'd just wrapped.
Oh, well. You can call it a wrap unless you'd like 5 more minutes.
God. When asked what I think are the most erotic words in the language, I sometimes think, cat. Terminally laid back now. When asked what I think are the most erotic words in the language, I sometimes think slowly, captive, audience. No, you know what? If I haven't made my case by now, brothers and sisters, I don't think I will make it in the next 5. I ask you to excuse me. If anyone thinks that there's a question, who's heard me, who thinks there's a question I answered poorly, or inadequately, or badly, or failed to answer at all, and would like to challenge me, I'd happily give them 5 minutes. But I have, so to say, shot my bolt otherwise. Is there anyone who would like to challenge me? Yes. Please.
If there is no God, why do you spend your whole life trying to convince people that there isn't? Why don't you just stay home?
Was the
Can you repeat that?
was the question?
The question is, if there is no God, why spend your life and career trying to refute that? Why not just leave it alone and stay home? Fair enough?
Well, it isn't my whole career, for one thing. It's become a major preoccupation of my life, though, in the last 8 or 9 years, especially since September 11th, 2001, to try and help generate an opposition to theocracy and its depredations internationally. That is now probably my main political preoccupation. To help people in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Israel, resist those who sincerely want to encompass the destruction of civilization and sincerely believe they have God on their side in wanting to do so. Maybe I will take a few minutes just to say something that I find repulsive about especially monotheistic, messianic religion. With a large part of itself, it quite clearly wants us all to die. It wants this world to come to an end. You can tell the yearning for things to be over whenever you read any of its real texts or listen to any of its real, authentic spokesmen, not the sort of the pathetic apologists who sometimes masquerade for it. Those who talk, there was a famous spokesman for this in Virginia until recently, about the rapture, say that those of us who have chosen rightly will be gathered to the arms of Jesus, leaving all of the rest of you behind. If we're in a car, it's your lookout. That car won't have a driver anymore. If we're a pilot, that's your lookout. That plane will crash. We will be with Jesus, and the rest of you can go straight to hell. The eschatological element that is inseparable from Christianity. If you don't believe that there is to be an apocalypse, there is going to be an end, a separation of the sheep and the goats, a condemnation, a final one, then you're not really a believer. And the contempt for the things of this world shows through all of them. It's well put in an old rhyme from an English exclusive brethren sect. It says that we are the pure and chosen few, and all the rest are damned. There's room enough in hell for you. We don't want heaven crammed. You can tell it when you see the extreme Muslims talk. They cannot wait. They cannot wait for death and destruction to overtake and overwhelm the world. They can't wait for what I would call, without ambiguity, a final solution. When you look at the Israeli settlers, paid for often by American tax dollars, deciding that if they can steal enough land from other people and get all the Jews into the promised land and all the non-Jews out of it, then finally the Jewish people will be worthy of the return of the Messiah. And there are Christians in this country who consider it their job to help this happen so that Armageddon can occur, so that the painful business of living as humans and studying civilization and trying to acquire learning and knowledge and health and medicine and to push back the front can all be scrapped, and the cult of death can take over. That, to me, is a hideous thing in eschatological terms, in end times terms, on its own. A hateful idea, a hateful practice, and a hateful theory, but very much to be opposed in our daily lives, where there are people who sincerely mean it, who want to ruin the good relations that could exist between different peoples, nations, races, countries, tribes, ethnicities, who openly say they love death more than we love life, and who are betting that with God on their side, they're right about that. So when I say, as the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything, I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means we can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence of sadomasochism. The essence of abjection. The essence of the master-slave relationship. And that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil. And though I do some nights stay home, I enjoy more the nights when I go out and fight against this ultimate wickedness and ultimate stupidity. Thank you.
Dr. Turek, your close.
First of all, I want to thank everyone. I know it's been a long night, and I enjoy listening to Christopher, even if I don't agree with him. And I want to thank Christopher for being here and putting so much effort into this.